So welcome to another episode of From the Collection. We're excited to share two more objects from our collection with you guys today. They're going to be two different objects than last time. And we're going to start with some introductions. So my name is Becca, and I am the Program and Outreach Coordinator. And that is basically just a fancy term for the fact that I get to come up with the programs that people attend, and I get to teach people about history, which is super exciting. Maureen?
And my name's Maureen. I'm the curator here at the Chapman, and my job is to come up with exhibits for the museum and then take care of the objects that the museum owns.
And of course, we cannot forget the official mascot of the Chapman Museum, Zopher.
Hey, hello, hey, it's me. Thanks for having me, everyone. Hey, glad to
It's
be here.
it's been a while since we've seen you, Zopher. What have you been up to?
Oh, I've been so busy, so busy. Let me tell you, the official mascot of the Chapman Museum. Let's see, I made an appearance around town. I went to Independence Day. I went to a concert in the park. I hung out at the farmers market, and finally set up my new office. It's
Oh,
a real
you
nice
have a
place here.
you have an office now?
Oh yeah, it's a shared office technically, but I'm letting the kids rent it out. It's a nice place,
Oh, are you?
make a little
Ah,
inside.
I see. We'll see who gets the desk this week. All right.
Well, we've got a lot to get to this afternoon, so we're going to jump right in.
All right. So I'm going to share our screen. So bear with me just a moment. Let's see. We need this up. And this is our slide. So go ahead.
So, just as a reminder, the Chapman Museum has lots of objects from the past stored in our archives and collection spaces. Some of these items are primary sources, and a primary source is an object that was used or created by someone in the past. Primary sources can be letters or photographs, artifacts, clothing, speeches, or more. And the kids in this picture are looking at a primary source, and that can actually be found in the dining room of the DeLong House here at the museum. But we also have secondary sources stored in our collection, and a secondary source is an item or work that was created after a historical event. So, for example, a Wikipedia page on George Washington would be considered a secondary source because the people who wrote that article on Washington didn't know him personally and weren't alive when he was. So, some of the secondary sources in our museum collection include reference books, reproductions, or just research files. But just like primary sources, secondary sources help people learn more about the past.
All right, so we're going to share what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to be sharing, like we did just last episode, two different objects from our collection. We are going to learn about the time period these objects were from. And actually today, both of our objects actually come from the same period in history, which is pretty cool. But what is unique about this time is that last episode, we showed you two primary sources. This time, we're going to show you a primary source and a secondary source. So it's a little different this time. But throughout the program, I'm going to open it up to questions. So if you have an answer or if you want to share something, we have a small enough group that you can just kind of shout it out. Or if you'd like to just type it in the chat, you can do that as well. You're more than welcome to just sit back and relax, but it is more fun if you interact. All right, so I am going to stop sharing my screen because I have a question, and that is, what do you guys know about the Gilded Age? And if you have never heard that term before, maybe think about what comes to mind when you hear that term. So if you would like to share or include yourself in this, feel free. Zopher, any thoughts about the Gilded Age? Anything come to mind or make you think of something?
I guess it's gilded. I'm sure. I'm certain.
It would be gilded. All right. So we'll go over that in just a bit. We're going to share some historical context. Now, just like last time, historical context is basically background information. It helps us know about what was happening in history at the time these objects would have been used. So again, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go over some historical context for the Gilded Age. So bear with me. Right. There we go. All right. So the Gilded Age is a period in U.S. history from the 1870s to the early 1900s. Now, if something is gilded, it means it is covered in a thin layer of gold and it hides what's underneath. And this is a really good image to kind of have in our mind that represents what the Gilded Age or what was happening during the Gilded Age. Because during this period, we have a lot of people who are making a ton of money. They are incredibly wealthy. But underneath all that wealth, we have people who are suffering in some extreme poverty situations. Now, three things are going to happen during the Gilded Age. We're going to have industrialization, we're going to have urbanization, and we're going to have new technologies, or they're going to be introduced. We're going to talk about those new technologies in just a bit. Right now, we're going to focus on industrialization and urbanization because those are two words you might not have heard before. So industrialization is what happens when people start to do or start using machines to do work that they had once done by hand. So during the Gilded Age, large companies are going to begin to use technology to mass produce goods. Now, if something is being mass produced, it means they are making a lot of it all at once. And they basically, to do this, what they did is they built factories. And factories need workers. If you have no one in your factory, it's not going to be a very good factory. Zopher agrees. So what the owners and the bosses of these factories did is that they hired lots of people to work in them. Now, many of these factories were in urban areas or cities. And urbanization is what happens when people move from the country to the city. And they were doing that because there were jobs in the factories which were in the city. And New York City, south of us, and Chicago out west are two cities that saw a ton of, or a big population boom during this time. Now, very often the people who are working in these factories are immigrants. An immigrant is someone who moves from one country to live in another. And at this point in history, many immigrants are coming from countries such as Russia, Italy, Germany, Poland, and Ireland. And that's just on the East Coast. Out on the West Coast by California, immigrants are coming from places like Japan and China. And the reason they're coming to America and the reason immigrants still come to America is because they are looking to have a better life. Many times they are leaving their homelands where there is sickness or famine. There's not enough food for them to eat, or their friends and family are getting very sick. Sometimes there were laws that prevented them from having or celebrating or practicing their religion. And other times, immigrants were escaping dangerous conditions like war or other things. The big hope for these immigrants coming to America is that they wanted to have a better life.
Right. My ancestors from Ireland, right? From the hometown, from home city. My
Mhm.
ancestors, they were told there were no cats here. They said in the streets, they said the streets were paved with cheese. Well,
Oh, wow.
technically,
Interesting.
right. No,
Well,
we're
you know
not so
what,
much.
Zopher? They weren't your ancestors weren't the only ones to believe that. Many immigrants were told that America was, quote, the golden country and that life here would be better. And in some ways it was, and in other ways it was very hard and it was a very tough transition. So just like before, I want to show you a map of the country. So this is a map from 1880, or it shows at least what the country looked like in 1880. And for the most part, it kind of looks like what the country looks like today. The big difference is this space in the middle, which is in this light green color. So that space, there are people living there. The United States government owns that land, but it is considered territories. They haven't developed these areas into states yet. So that's the major difference between now and America during the Gilded Age, is that we have all this land, but it hasn't quite been organized into states yet. And the Gilded Age lasted over 20 years. That's a long period of time. And so there are several presidents during the Gilded Age. We are not going to talk about every single one because we would be here for days. But I did want you to see their faces and learn their names. So many times the presidents of the Gilded Age, they are sometimes called the forgotten presidents. And it's not that we want to forget them, it's just that their names aren't as familiar to us as, say, like Abe Lincoln or George Washington. So during the Gilded Age, we have Rutherford B. Hayes. He is up here. We have James Garfield. We have Chester Alan Arthur. He's in the middle. We have Benjamin Harrison, and we have Grover Cleveland.
Oh, wow, that's quite the mustache on Chester Allen Arthur there.
It
But
is.
I think I got him beat here, right? And that Garfield, man, oh, what a look at. Hope things go well for him.
Your whiskers do look quite good, Zopher.
You're looking good. Very good.
Thank you. I know,
All
I
right.
fashioned them myself.
All right. So just like last time, I want to show you some images of everyday life during the Gilded Age. So we talked about how some people during the Gilded Age were quite wealthy. And if you were a wealthy woman at this time, you probably would have been able to afford very beautiful dresses and hats like this woman is wearing. If you were a wealthy gentleman, you probably would have worn a tuxedo and a top hat for special occasions. And in fact, Zopher, the outfit exactly that you're wearing is based on clothing that would have been worn during this time.
A lot with my own paycheck. $50. I have to bring it back after 6 days.
Yeah, you're quite the fashionable mouse. Very
Indeed,
nice.
I am. See
You
this?
are looking good.
Oh,
All right.
sounds
So I also want to show you a picture of a very fancy mansion that was built in New York City in 1883. And if you were a very wealthy person, you might have lived in a large house called a mansion. And this particular one that I just put up on the screen, this was built for a family called the Vanderbilt family. And it was built in New York City, and like I said, in 1883. Now, we're also going to talk about some famous people who kind of made their money or made their living out of the Gilded Age. So many of these men have names that you will recognize or you have heard before, and all of them became quite wealthy during the Gilded Age. So our first one is John D. Rockefeller. There he is. He was a businessman. He started a company called Standard Oil. Next to him is Cornelius Vanderbilt. He started a railroad empire. Next to him is Andrew Carnegie. Sometimes we hear Carnegie Hall, but his actual name was pronounced Carnegie. And he led the expansion of the steel industry. And then we have J.P. Morgan, who was in banking. And sometimes these men are given the nickname robber barons, which kind of strums up some interesting thoughts. But they are given this nickname because they, in some ways, they took advantage of people by not paying them enough money, and they saved the money that they didn't pay those people and kept it for themselves. So that's not good. We don't like that. However, at the same time, many of these men were quite generous. They donated money to start libraries, to fund churches, to start up art museums, and more. And that's kind of history in general, is that we like to think that history is black and white. But really, there's some gray areas too, and good people can do bad things, and bad people can do good things sometimes. So these men are a bit kind of in that gray area. They do bad things, but they also do good things. All right, I'm gonna flip my page again. All right. Now, we mentioned before that many immigrants were working in factories. So conditions in factories were often very unsafe and unhealthy. Many people, they would be crowded together in a single room. You can see it kind of in this picture down here. There's a lot of, looks like men, all doing kind of a similar task. There were typically very few windows, and ventilation, or like the air being moved throughout the room, was usually pretty poor. So people could get sick very easily. Sometimes workers would use large machines to help them do their jobs. And these are great. They help them do their jobs, but they could also be very dangerous. Workers could get their hair or their hands or fingers caught in the machines, and they could get hurt. And factories didn't have fire escapes or sprinkler systems the way modern buildings do, so they could be very dangerous sometimes. And if a worker did get hurt or sick on the job, they could be fired or let go from their job. Today in 2024, we have laws that protect workers, but in the Gilded Age, that was not the case. All right. So, Zopher, I have a question for you. What do you notice about the workers in the picture I just put up on the screen, the one in the top right corner?
Oh, you're all kind of big when you're a mouse on the floor. It's
Well,
kind
they're
of get,
big to you, but these are actually children. So in the
Oh,
Gilded Age, yeah, it is kind of sad. In the Gilded Age, it was not uncommon for children to have to leave school and go into the workforce to help support their families. Many times that families were just not making enough money, so they would have to take the kids out of school and say, "All right, Johnny, or whatever your name's going to be, you're going to have to go into a factory and work." And these kids worked long hours in dangerous conditions. Now, today we have laws that say children cannot work and they have to be in school. But in the Gilded Age, that was not the case. All right. And before I showed you a picture of a big fancy mansion, but most people were not that wealthy. And for most immigrants and working class people, they are not living in mansions, they are living in tenements. Tenements are small, crowded apartment buildings. And living conditions in the tenements were pretty poor. Families, we can see down here in the corner, we have a family of it looks like about seven. They would have been crammed into only one or two rooms. So these are, very cramped spaces. You're definitely not getting your own bedroom. You're probably sharing a bed with your sibling. Um, Families often didn't have indoor plumbing. There was very little light, and disease or sickness would spread pretty rapidly. So conditions were not great in the tenements. Finally, I want to talk about some inventions that came out of this period. Many of these inventions we still use in one way or another today. And the first one up on your screen is actually a camera. I know it doesn't really look like it, but this is a very early version of a camera. So we talked about in our last episode how during the Civil War, photography started to come around. And taking pictures in the early 1800s was kind of difficult. You had to lug around a ton of equipment. To develop the photos, you had to use chemicals. But in 1888, in the middle of the Gilded Age, a man named George Eastman, he develops a new type of camera that was very easy to transport or move around, and it had a roll of film included. So because of him, photography becomes very popular and accessible. And this, I know it doesn't look like it, but this is actually a very early version of a telephone. Now, our telephones of today, they don't look a thing like that. But the telephone came about in the Gilded Age and it changed communication. People could now call each other on the phone instead of having to write a letter or send a telegram like they did in the last episode we talked about. And they can hear their voices, which is new. So the telephone made communication much faster and easier. So
sorry, I
this
was
is
paying
a
attention.
phonograph. So this is an invention that could record and play sound. So before this invention, there was no real way to record people speaking. Now, after this, different versions of the phonograph are going to come about, and in the following years, each time they're going to improve in quality. And eventually, people are going to be able to buy phonographs and put them in their living rooms, and then they can listen to music or other recordings. All right, I bet we can tell what this one is. So during the Gilded Age, incandescent light bulbs are invented. Now, in our last video, we talked about how people had to light their homes with candles or lanterns, but with the invention of the light bulb, it's a lot easier and safer to light your home at night. And our last invention is the railroad. So the railroad changed transportation in the United States. It made it a lot quicker and easier to get from one place to another. Now, something called the Transcontinental Railroad was completed just a few years before the Gilded Age started. And this was a huge project that basically connected train tracks in the east, on the east coast of the country, to train tracks on the west side of the country, and basically allowed people to then cross and go across the country in about a week as opposed to a couple months. So railroad is awesome, great way to transport literally people and kind of transform the country. All right, so we have given you plenty of historical context. So now we are going to show off our first object. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Good part.
There we go. All right. Maureen, you're putting on gloves?
Yes, so just like last time, I'm going to put on gloves before I touch the object. And just by wearing these gloves, I'm making sure that I can help prevent this object from any sort of further damage.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
So,
It won't let me anywhere near the objects,
yeah, we
considering I
won't.
have to run on all 4 feet, or I guess hands.
I also don't see you wearing gloves, Zopher. So,
Yes, we have to
Okay,
get you some custom gloves.
I fresh soap right on the hands.
All right.
All
So
you need.
as Maureen is showing off the
Oh,
object,
that's really cool.
I want you to start. It is very cool. I want you to start to think about what you notice. So think about size, shape, color, materials that it might have been made out of. And if you have a good observation and you want to share, feel free to share it. If not, we can start. She's going to show you all angles. There you go. Very cool. So if you don't want to share your observation, now is the time to think about what this object might have been used for or what it is. Zopher, do you have any guesses?
Let's see. Gilded Age. Fire truck, wagons. It's gonna be uh, an iPhone.
An iPhone? No, I don't think it's an iPhone. Well, Zopher, will you give us a drum roll? All
I
right.
can't. It's not easy for me. No foldable thumbs. Yeah.
I see. I see. It's pretty good. It's a good drum roll. All right. So this object is a toy fire engine that is actually pulled by a team of horses. So Maureen, I'm going to share our screen. Do you want to tell us a little more about it?
Sure.
All right. Give me one moment. Share. All right.
So this toy, the toy fire engine, is made from cast iron. So as I was showing it to you, it's quite heavy. And we believe it was manufactured by the Dent Hardware Company between 1895 and 1910. That's about the best date range that we can give.
Zopher, do you remember our last episode when we didn't know everything about the powder horn?
That should. Pretty sure I remembered that. I think I got it right, actually. You might be misremembering, but I think I got it right.
Oh,
I'm
all
pretty
right.
sure.
Well, we just want to say that we don't always know every little thing about an object, and the same is true for this toy. So we don't have an exact date for when it was made. We don't necessarily know who owned it, but it is a good example of what a toy from the Gilded Age would have looked like.
Yeah, and many of the toys would have been made from cast iron during the Gilded Age. It was kind of like what plastic is to us today. It was a cheap material, it was accessible, it was easy to mold into different shapes or figures. And so a cast iron toy from the Dent Hardware Company, we would see the cast iron toys in general were more common. And one from the Dent Hardware Company could cost anywhere from 10 cents to about $10, depending on the size of the toy. So we believe that this fire engine would have cost about 75 cents, which in today's money is close to $25.
So based on the price, we believe that this toy would probably have been most likely owned by a young boy from a middle to upper class family, and it might have been given as a holiday gift or even as a birthday gift.
Hey, how do you know it was owned by a boy? What if, say, adult rat wanted to play with something like this? Just throwing out there, just asking a question.
Zopher, that's a really good question, and you do have a very good point. Now, we don't know for sure that it was owned by a boy, but what we do know about the Gilded Age is that toys were often used to teach children about the jobs that they would have when they were older, and that gender roles during the Gilded Age were very, very strict. So, for example, a girl would have been expected to grow up to be a wife and a mother. She would have been in charge of running the household and taking care of the children. That would be expected out of her. So, the toys that a young child or a young girl would have played with during the Gilded Age might have been a doll, it might have been tea sets, could be a dollhouse with miniature furniture. All of which kids still play with today, but definitely during the Gilded Age, it would have been used to try and teach a girl about what her future role would be. Now, boys, on the other hand, they would have been expected to go out and get a job. So their toys would have reflected this. They might have played with building blocks because maybe they would have been an architect. They might have played with sports equipment to keep them strong because they would have to, maybe join the military or work out of outside the home. They also might have played with toy soldiers or toy vehicles, just like the fire engine that we just showed you. Well, our next object is also from the Gilded Age, but it is very different from the toy we just showed you. And it's also quite a large object. So what we're going to do is we are actually going to turn our camera towards the object. So the object will not be moving in front of the camera. We're going to slightly pivot and you will see it standing on a table. So I'm going to stop sharing our screen so you can see our object. All right, excellent. All right, so just like before, as Maureen is exhibiting the object, I want you to start to think about size, shape, color, materials it might have been made out of. And if you have a good observation and you would like to share it, feel free to.
And on the very top, it does have
A dial.
a dial. Yes. Here, I'll give you a good look at that, so that can be part of your educated guess.
Here, I noticed something. I think you got it crooked on its side.
Thank you, Zopher. I'll put it right back upright.
All right, now that you've had a good look at the object, I want you to start to think about what it is or what it might have been used for. All right, Zopher, any guesses on what this object might have been used for?
Well, let me think. It's round. It's the kids that get around a basketball. That's what they do down at the park.
Basketball. Interesting.
Yeah, the
All
balls,
right.
they dribble, and it's the Knicks. It's a great team. Heard.
I don't think it's a basketball, but good guess.
Oh,
Do you want to give us another drum roll so we can reveal it?
okay. Just give me a second
Do
here.
your best. I know the opposable thumbs are a challenge. The
I
lack
can't do
of.
that. Let's see. You do a drum. I'm not doing a drum roll. Do it. Do it. Just do it. Do this for me. Do this little thing. Hey,
Nice work, Zopher. Nice work. All right. So this object is a time globe. Zopher, have you ever heard of a time globe?
I can't say I have. Is that
All right. Well, I think
was it a
Maureen is
Doctor
going
Who
to tell us
device?
more
What's going
about
on?
it. So we're going to tilt our camera back around. And I'm going to share our screen and we will learn more about this time globe. So bear with me one moment. Go. All right.
So a time globe was an object that allowed the owner to see what time it was anywhere in the world. There were three basic parts to a time globe: the globe itself, and the second is a mechanism that allowed the globe to rotate, and that was located inside the globe. And then the third part is the base. Now, around the globe, you see a ring, and that has numbers on it, very similar to a clock or a clock face. And the idea was that as the globe rotated, it would tell you what the time was in that part of the world. And at the top of the globe, like I said, there was that dial, and that gave the local time of the place you were looking at. And you would wind the clock by turning the feather at the end of the arrow. So you can kind of see that there in the photos.
Oh, that looks fancy. I got a feeling not anyone can afford that.
You are absolutely correct, Zopher. This would have been owned by a wealthy person who had the money and the space to use it. So you probably wouldn't have found this in the tenements. And the price for a time globe actually ranged from about $3 up to about $200, depending on how big of a globe you wanted. In today's money, the smallest globe would have cost a person about $100. And wealthy people during the Gilded Age sometimes put their time globes in their parlors or their libraries as a way to show off their wealth and status. And if you don't know, a parlor is a fancy living room. And the picture we have on our screen is actually what the DeLong parlor looked like in 1910, which is kind of the tail end of the Gilded Age.
Now, we should let you know that this particular time globe that we showed you is what's called a reproduction. And that means that it wasn't made during the Gilded Age, but it was made a little bit of time after. And therefore, it's considered what we talked about earlier, a secondary source. And I know that that's a big word, maybe we're not sure, but a reproduction is like a copy of an object or an image. And so sometimes museums will have reproductions out on display in order to protect the original object or picture if it's too delicate to display.
And sometimes a museum might put out a reproduction to allow visitors to touch or handle an object. This allows the visitors to see how the object would be used or how it works, but it keeps the original safe.
Mm, interesting. So, do we know anyone in Glens Falls who owned a time globe? I mean, apart from me, of course. Got at least two of these in my basement.
Wow. Wow. All right. Well, I am sure plenty of people owned time globes, but the real
Mm.
reason this is in our collection here at the museum is because the inventor of the time globe lived right here in Glens Falls.
What?
I know. Crazy, right? So,
That's how it got so
it
known.
is true. His name was Louis Paul Jouvet, and he was born in Switzerland, and he actually immigrated, we just talked about what that is, to the United States, and he eventually is going to settle in Glens Falls in the year 1864. Once he had settled in Glens Falls, he opened up a watch and jewelry shop. And the location of his shop is actually where City Park is now. And we have a picture down in the left-hand corner of what his shop looked like. So Mr. Zouvet began working on his idea for a time globe beginning in 1864, and he completed his first globe 3 years later in 1867. 9 years after that, so quite a passage of time, Mr. Zouvet exhibited or showed off his time globe at an event called the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. This is kind of like a big fair. There were different pavilions or booths, and they displayed inventions. They taught people about history. There was lots of things going on at this exposition. And actually, at the exposition, Mr. Zouvet wins a Medal of Merit for his invention of the time globe.
Oh, for Mr. Zouvet. I guess you could say his invention was ahead of its time,
No,
right?
all right, Zopher, that's a good one. I'll give you that.
Right. Well, the time globe is pretty, but couldn't they just look up the time in different countries?
So that's
Right?
not
It's like
really.
oh, sorry, you go.
No, you're fine because you had a good point. That, in modern day times, that would be something we could do, but it wasn't that easy in the Gilded Age. There's no internet, so nobody is able to Google the time in, say, France. If you knew the time difference between here and Paris, you might be able to calculate it manually by doing the math. But by using this globe and kind of just looking at it, it makes it a lot easier.
Oh yeah, see that makes sense. I was gonna say that. I've done the calculations myself. I go to Grand Central. I don't even need to look at the clocks, right? Kids, on the other hand, they need a squeak talk, right, to see the times. These kids these days
What's
don't even know how
squeak?
to read a map.
What's squeak talk?
Oh, it's everyone's on it. I got a squeak talk. My kids, everyone. I'm very popular,
You're
actually.
okay. I've heard of TikTok, so far. I've not heard of squeak.
Yeah, yeah, same, yeah. Except it's a mice. We got dance mice. We got great cheese recipes. We got basically anything.
Oh,
Zopher, are there any cat videos on Squeak Talk?
Oh, the cats. Oh wait, no, it's
watch
yeah.
out, Zopher. I don't know if the museum has a cat, but you might want to be on the lookout.
We need a cat.
Might be a cat around. Cat. All right. Well, Zopher, thank you again for joining us today. And thank you, of course, to Maureen for sharing some more amazing objects from our collection. Now, one last thing before you leave, and that is to say, it is your turn. So we want you to get creative and we want you to create a piece of art. This can be a drawing, it can be a story, it could be a poem, a song, something we didn't even think of. But what it must do is incorporate one of the objects we discussed today. So what you can do once you've done your piece of art is that you can send it along with your first name to my email address, which is educator@chapmanmuseum.org, and you might just find it featured on our social media pages, which is pretty cool. So thank you for all of you for joining us today. We hope to have more episodes of From the Collection in the future. So just keep an eye out on our social media pages and our museum website. And until then, have a fantastic summer. Keep learning and make sure to visit us at the museum. We have tons of cool stuff.